End of the 1800s, a new art form flickered into life. It looked like our dreams. Movies are a multi-billion-dollar global entertainment industry now. But what drives them isn't box office or showbiz. It's passion, innovation. So let's travel the world to find this innovation for ourselves. We'll discover it in this man, Stanley Donen, who made Singing in the Rain, and in Jane Campion in Australia, and in the films of Kyoko Kagawa, who was in perhaps the greatest movie ever made, and in Amitabh Bachchan, the most famous actor in the world, and in the movies of Martin Scorsese and Spike Lee, Lars von Trier and Akira Kurosawa. Welcome to the story of film, an odyssey, an epic tale of innovation across 12 decades, 6 continents, and 1,000 films. In this chapter, we explore the movies of the Coen brothers and Quentin Tarantino and discover Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet. Almost every film made during the first 100 years of the story of film was made like this. To get a shot to move through space, you put the camera on something that moved. To film a deer, as we do here, fleetingly, you had to find a real deer and photograph it. Unless, of course, you drew an animated deer like Bambi. But then came the first days of digital. Look at this shot. Smoke coming out of buildings, sunlight from top right. It looks like the camera was on a helicopter. All attempts to make the shot look like a real city photographed, but it isn't. These tiny horses kicking up dust look like the deer in the previous shot, but they're not. A place like this is where this shot was made. Almost everything in the shot was drawn on a computer like this one. D.W. Griffith had put a camera on a giant crane to create this gliding shot of an ancient city. Here in the first days of digital, director Ridley Scott wanted to create a gliding epic shot of an ancient city with tiny people like ants, too. Computers became central to cinema in the 1990s. Instead of film imagery being made up of tiny grains of silver halide on celluloid, it became tiny rows of digital information, ones and zeros. In 1921, a boy electrician called Philo Farnsworth was ploughing a field. He looked at the rows of earth and realized that imagery could be made of tiny rows of picture information too, scanned at incredible speeds. Jump 70 years and you get this. A liquid metal representation of a person turns into a photographed actor. Director James Cameron had his design and technical teams scan the photographed image into the computer. Then they drew shiny surfaces, movements and reflections to make it look like the man had become Mercury. The technique became known as computer-generated imagery, CGI. Live action and animation had been combined before, as far back as Gene Kelly dancing with Jerry Mouse in Anchors Away. This was crucially different. Jerry looked two-dimensional. The light on him doesn't change. He looked like he'd been drawn. But the liquid metal man looked like he'd been photographed. The metal seemed to have real substance, as if it was actually in the helicopter here, reflecting the light in the shot and the head of the pilot. Get out. The implications were astonishing. It was as if cinema had been rewound and started again from the olden days. The first animators tried to show a dinosaur. The wobbly lines show that it was drawn with real human hands. Now, Steven Spielberg could do so with such hyper-realism that we could almost smell a dinosaur's breath, apprehend the texture of the dinosaur's skin, the shadows cast by the small one, the reflections on the floor of the feet of the T-Rex. This is the only surviving footage of the ocean liner, the Titanic, a flickering pan right that shows its massiveness, its hope. As we watch, we imagine the grand tragedy that befell it. 80 years later, James Cameron shows us what we've long wanted to see, as if it had actually been photographed. The sinking liner by the light of the silvery moon, shots filmed in deep space to show the height of the boat and the length of the jump. '70s cinema had been about what we wanted to see: Jaws, The Exorcist, Star Wars. '90s cinema had become can see. This was exciting. Movies had become spectacle again, about the thrill of seeing, as if for the first time. But once the thrill had passed, old questions remained. The first is about admiration or ethics. Real human courage and imagination goes into a shot like this. The camera and the guy are really strapped to the plane as it does a scary loop-the-loop. Hard work and long hours spent in relative comfort, eating pizza, go into a shot like this. Despite its bravura, has reality lost some of its realness? The second old question is a human question. It's the theme of the story of film: innovation. All techniques, including CGI, should be used inventively. The first mainstream feature film to be made entirely with a computer was this inventive one. Director John Lasseter and his team used the new possibilities of CGI to render shadows, do dynamic deep staging, and see from positions that would be difficult for a real camera to shoot from.
Safer in the cockpit than a cargo bay. What an idiot.
This was the pricey end of CGI, but as always, innovation doesn't need to be expensive.
You alright?
This film was not only shot mostly on low-tech digital video, but marketed on the internet.
No, I don't need any help. I'm okay.
What happened?
Nothing happened. I'm just very hungry, and I'm very tired, and I'm very scared, and I just want to go home, okay?
Okay.
But I'm fine, and we're both okay.
It had the look and sound of camcorder video footage. His voice is close to the camera, recorded by its internal mic. The whites in her face burn out, a very video effect. In the same year, digital cinemas opened up in America, Korea, Spain, Germany and Mexico. And in 2001 to 2002, George Lucas shot Star Wars Episode II entirely without using celluloid. And, as has often been the case in the story of film, Asian filmmakers were even more innovative. Here's Zhang Yimou's House of Flying Daggers, a blind dancer. To challenge her, a man flicks a bean against drums to create sounds around her. The camera rushes forward with the bean, then swishes left. The bean's computer generated. Motion blur, again computer generated. Then her sleeve garment picks up a CGI sword. Then the man throws a CGI plate at her. She's seeing and not seeing, but so are we. Images doing things they could never do before, all with the brilliant Chinese choreography and grace. Remarkable innovation, the theme of the story of film. But if what ran through the camera in the 90s, digital tape rather than celluloid, changed, what ran in front of the camera seemed to change too. Reality seemed to lose some of its realness. Life was no longer just modern, it became postmodern, playful. In the 90s, American films like Schindler's List, LA Confidential and Silence of the Lambs were serious 40s genre pictures in new guises. But the real flavours of the times were irony and postmodernism, the idea that there are no great truths, that everything's recycled. More than previously, filmmakers started playing games with old genres, quoting from previous films, making films about films. Even the master of new American cinema of the 70s, Martin Scorsese, started doing this. Look at the ending of Scorsese's film Goodfellas. Like several of his movies, it's about gangsters. But what's different is that this gangster looks right into the camera, a very postmodern thing to do.
I'm an average nobody. Get to live the rest of my life like a schnook.
And then, out of nowhere, Joe Pesci shoots right down the lens. A surprising shot until we remember that one of the oldest films ever made, The Great Train Robbery, did the same thing. Scorsese knew this shot and repeated it. Film quoting film, a very 90s thing to do. American movies of the 90s were full of playful twists on old films. In this classic film noir from the 40s, for example, two killers are about to do a hit. The lighting's dark, the shadows are from German Expressionism, and typically, the killers don't say much. There's little dialogue. Compare that to this scene of two killers about to do a hit in one of the most influential gangster pictures of the 90s, Pulp Fiction. The lighting's much brighter, but what's more noticeable is that in Pulp Fiction, they talk a lot.
You know what I'm saying? I ain't saying it's right, but you saying a foot massage don't mean nothing. I'm saying it does. And look, I given 1 million ladies 1 million foot massages, and they all meant something. We act like they...
Talking about everyday stuff like foot massages isn't exactly something that Humphrey Bogart would have done. Scenes like this breathed new life into American screenplay writing. They stopped the story, but opened up the discourse.
Right, man. They ain't no sense of humor about this shit. You know what I'm saying?
It's an interesting point. Come on, let's get in character.
It's as if they'd been out of character, like they forgot that they're in a movie.
What's her name again?
Mia.
Mia.
Why are you so interested?
As if to emphasize the dialogue, the shot remains static behind the two guys, so we listen rather than look.
Take care of her?
No, man. Just take her out, you know. Show her a good time. Make sure she don't get lonely.
You're gonna be taking Mia Wallace out on a date?
It is not a date. You know, it's like if you were going to take your buddy's wife to a movie or something. It's just good company, that's all. It's not a date. It's definitely not a date.
This emphasis on the surrealism of everyday talk became known as Tarantino-esque after the film's writer-director, Quentin Tarantino.
How you boys doing?
What about right here?
Tarantino-esque somehow meant both more real and less real than life at the same time. And Tarantino wasn't only significant for his dialogue. Like Scorsese, he was a hyperlink to film history. For example, he championed in America this Hong Kong director, Yuen Wo-ping, who we've already met. Tarantino then hired Master Yuen to choreograph the Kill Bill films. And look at this scene in Tarantino's film Reservoir Dogs. In long lens, wearing black glasses, Harvey Keitel shoots the police with 2 guns. 5 years earlier, in Ringo Lam's Hong Kong film City on Fire, Danny Lee, in black glasses, shoots the police with 2 guns. And here's the climax of Reservoir Dogs. 3 jewel thieves pull guns on each other, a death triangle, a warehouse, a police mole's bleeding. Wide shot, then close-ups.
Let's just put our guns down and let's settle this.
Thieves have just done a failed heist.
Joe, if you kill that man, you die next. Repeat, if you kill that man, you die next.
Larry, we have been friends.
And here's the climax of City on Fire. 3 jewel thieves pull guns on each other. A death triangle. We're in a warehouse. A police mole is sitting below them. Wide shot, then close-ups. The thieves have just done a failed heist. Talk about déjà vu. Movie making about the story of film. And it wasn't only action cinema that Tarantino admired. He loved this art movie, Jean-Luc Godard's Bande à Part. This is its title sequence. Fast-cut close-ups of the main characters, the letters cutting graphically up on screen. Tarantino used this title for his own production company, A Bande à Part. He was punning on film history. How 90s. His company logo appeared graphically, yellow on black, at the start of Pulp Fiction. Tarantino's postmodernism was in his writing, but a look at Natural Born Killers, made by Oliver Stone, from Tarantino's screenplay, shows that visually, Tarantino was a traditionalist. A young couple's on a rampage. Stone has this scene shot on film, on a glide cam and graded green.
On reality, you got it.
My name is Wayne Gale!
This POV shot's also on film, but in full colour. Then we're in handheld video. This mashup of styles is almost a definition of postmodernism. No one type of image could capture the truth. Reality was multiple and fragmented. A fourth strain of 90s postmodernism was the kooky, technically brilliant films of Minnesota-born brothers Joel and Ethan Coen. They started the 90s with this great image. A hat falls into the foreground. Trees are out of focus. Then the wind blows the hat and the focus follows it. The forest comes into focus. Then the story begins. The Coen brothers became masters of visual and story precision. By the mid-90s, the Coens had honed their comic discrepant worldview by focusing on what used to be called, in Frank Capra films, the little man caught up in events that he barely understands. Here, the little man's a novice mailroom worker, but he becomes a chief executive with the big cigar to show it. The film's shot in blues and navies. The novice is pure Coen brothers. A gormless, rather asexual man, out of his depth, having strayed into the world of Capra, or Preston Sturges, or Howard Hawks.
Let's get to know one another, shall we? Let's chat. Random man.
George Clooney played a similar trespasser in O Brother, Where Art Thou?
I was trained in the metallurgic art before straitened circumstances forced you into life aimless wandering.
Jesus! Can I count on you people?
Sorry, Everett.
Clooney was wide-eyed, clueless. The imagery this time was golden.
Who elected you leader?
And talk about wide-eyed. Here's Jeff Bridges, high as a kite, in The Big Lebowski. A tower of 10-pin bowling shoes. His are handed out by Saddam Hussein. War in Iraq was on, and the Coens wanted to refer to it. And then we're in another 30s genre, the Busby Berkeley musical.
I pushed my soul in a deep dark hole, and then I followed it in. I watched myself crawling out as I was crawling in.
The Big Lebowski brilliantly married slacker dudeness with surreal design, a fondness for old Hollywood and 90s politics.
I broke my mind. I just dropped in to see what condition my condition was in.
The Coens' affection for their men gave their postmodernism heart.
Yeah, oh yeah, what condition my condition was in.
The most daring American postmodernist of the 90s and one of the country's greatest filmmakers was this man, Gus Van Sant. He's influenced by a wide range of movies, styles and periods, and refers to them as he talks. Van Sant's film My Own Private Idaho was about this young narcoleptic hustler. To show what the hustler feels like when he has an orgasm, Van Sant used the image of a barn falling onto a road. Seldom had a sex scene been pictured so imaginatively.
I think when I was a painter, and I think by the time I stopped painting, the last thing that I was painting were these landscapes. And definitely in My Own Private Idaho, for instance, the whole barn crashing into the landscape was literally from one of the paintings.
The film was full of empty landscape shots, golden light, the open road. Van Sant had intended to shoot other images and use them to show what the hustler felt as he lost consciousness, but he didn't have time to film them.
But we did have the one image of the barn falling. So since I had this like singular image, which was somewhat like, I guess, the singular image in The Shining of the blood coming out of the elevator.
I think we should discuss what should be done.
It was this one standalone special effect that was really beautiful. So we tried it just right in the middle of his orgasm because it was another kind of falling, you know, I think.
Van Sant's signature film, Elephant, was also about the fall from grace of young men. No movie of the 90s was more complexly connected to film history. Elephant was a response to the shootings at a school in Columbine. The film shot in the unfashionable 4:3 screen ratio. Van Sant follows young men with a Steadicam. There's little dialogue. The violence is unexplained. "14 years earlier, the British director Alan Clark made a film called Elephant, which used Steadicam to show the driven, almost trance-like walking of gunmen in Northern Ireland.
HBO was the only company that was interested in not making Columbine, but they were interested in making Elephant, and they were referring to the Alan Clark film. So it became known to us as Elephant because of that label, and I think it sort of was a similar statement. It was like a very abstract statement about Columbine.
constant walking in Clark's elephant influenced the forward walking in real time without much cutting in Van Sant's elephant and in his earlier movie, Jerry. These films felt in some way like video games, which became a new influence on 90s cinema. This one, Tomb Raider, with its image tracking forward to follow the main character from place to place, was particularly popular.
Yeah, the video game aspect is, including Jerry and Last Days, is coming from video games. Me playing video games was an effort for me to understand what was going on with the Columbine characters, because it was said that they had played video games, and so I didn't know what they were. And I had a computer, and my assistant said, oh, well, you can download the first level of Tomb Raider. And I was like, what's Tomb Raider? And he said, oh, that's just like a game, you know, it's like, there's lots of different games. I said, oh, there's different ones. Like, I didn't know anything about it. They were playing Doom, which is a different game, but I guess you couldn't find Doom on the computer. So I started playing Tomb Raider and became very, you know, amused by it and occupied by it in the way people do become occupied by video games. And so the video games were also informing. Video games are often doing what we were doing in Jerry. To get from point A to point B, you have to actually travel there. You can't cut like in cinema. You cut to the new location. You actually like walk, like in reality. Because of that, I started thinking about like cinema like that.
And if the influences on Van Sant weren't already rich enough, he then saw the brilliant Hungarian films of Béla Tarr. Tarr's Satan Tango shows the beauty of walking to and epic forward camera moves and the expressionism of glowing litter. Compare this to Van Sant's film Jerry. But this obsession with the beauty of walking, moving through space in real time, couldn't be applied to another Van Sant film, Last Days, which was inspired by the death of rock star Kurt Cobain.
We had made Elephant, which was very long, pensive, like traveling shots with down the hallways of the high school that recalled Béla's work. And now we're in like a house which had no real expansive hallways. And so our DP sort of like thought of Jean Dielman and thought maybe we should think in terms of that rather than traveling shots, maybe more fixed shots, which we did.
Jan Dielman is full of such fixed shots. It's this Belgian film by Chantal Akerman. Akerman films square on, in kitchens and domestic settings. Some of the shots of the rock star in Last Days are remarkably similar.
In the bedroom closet.
Jan Dielman is one of my favorite films, and in fact, in this documentary that we're making in our section on Ozu,
right.
a bit of Dielman because the camera's as low as in Ozu.
Yeah, Ozu was also on our minds, and because of the where you have your camera now. I mean, it was however many 30 inches off the ground. I think it was like a 40mm lens, and so yeah, we always had it like 36 inches off the ground, and it was always a 35mm lens.
But not even Van Sant's close reworking of Ozu and European cinema prepared us for this shot-for-shot remake of Alfred Hitchcock's film Psycho. The original was based on a true story. The remake was based on a film. Anne Heche was playing not so much a real person as a movie star playing a real person. Welcome to the first days of digital. Van Sant's movie departed from the original only in tiny details, such as here, where he inserts unexpected shots of clouds into the famous shower sequence. At the moment of death, Van Sant's woman's pupil dilates. And in the 90s, you could show more nudity. Van Sant couldn't quite keep his instinctive surrealism in check, but, strangely, thinks his film is very different from Hitchcock's.
The intentions of the movie was to see what would happen if you tried to, literally do the same thing. What did happen, and what I learned from it, was that even though your camera angles are actually the same, the performances are close, that the kind of intentions of the filmmaker and the soul of the filmmaker is different. My Psycho became devoid of like some of the most important things that were in the original, which were these sort of dark underlying tensions. In mine, it's the dark underlying tensions are kind of like not there. There's something else there that doesn't really fit with what Psycho is. So it kind of became an example of how you can't really copy something. I think it's just the way that I've been, creating and relating to film structurally, as being a language all its own, and being basically the language itself being what the film's about. What films are generally about. They can have subjects, but in the end, it's the language that's the true subject.
Jump from Gus Van Sant to this man in the first days of digital, and you find someone pushing cinema even further in the direction of art and ideas. The New York Times called him the greatest artist of his generation. Matthew Barney used to be a sportsman, and just like sportsmen work up a sweat, building their bodies, so Barney works up a sweat, making his films. Here he's doing something like indoor rock climbing, but this is no ordinary scene. Barney's playing a character, an apprentice artist working hard at his art. The film's called Cremaster, after the cremaster muscle that makes human testicles rise and fall. Barney rises, but other things fall. And we're in the Guggenheim Museum in New York. In Barney's films, it represents a human vagina, and New York's Chrysler Building represents a penis. Barney's dressed in Scottish tartan because in 1992 he did a drawing of a bagpipe with 5 pipes, each representing a place where he would film. One of the places was New York. That's why we're here. Maybe this makes the film sound overloaded with symbolism, but it has the beauty and determination of this silent comedy in which Harold Lloyd climbs a building. Lloyd encounters obstacles too. His climb is a vertical storyline of little incidents like Barney's. Now Barney's apprentice has reached the top of the Guggenheim, where we encounter his master, the sculptor Richard Serra, in dark clothes here, who's melting Vaseline which will trickle down the corkscrew of the building. Rise and fall. Barney the surrealist loves the texture of Vaseline. On lower levels, we glimpse a punk band who've impeded Barney's climb. The first days of digital were full of films referring to other movies and ideas, but few looked from such a great height as Barney's. There are 5 Cremaster films. They're a movie world all of their own. The coming of digital and postmodernism in cinema made America in the 90s fizz like lemonade. But the movies of the times were innovative in another way, through satire. 2 of the ballsiest satires of the late 80s and 90s were directed by Paul Verhoeven and written by this man, Ed Neumeier, who's as hyperactive and as full of ideas as his films and his times. Their first collaboration was RoboCop.
It was certainly a reaction to what was in the Reagan era, particularly though it was a reaction to, there was in the 80s, there was a period where businessmen, Japan was on the rise and businessmen started kind of reading samurai books and talking about themselves as killers, and so there was this notion of trying to bring actual violence into the boardroom, as it were. That was part of the idea.
15 seconds to comply.
Businessmen want to make money by launching this new police robot. It roars like a lion. We're in a typical power boardroom. Fast cutting, steely blue colors.
I had a theory, which is not an original theory, that if you did something very violent in a movie and then you told a joke, that you would use the tension of the violence would come out in the laugh.
All right, don't touch him! Don't touch him! He doesn't hear it!
Dick, I'm very disappointed. I'm sure it's only a glitch. A temporary setback. You call this a glitch?
But the businessmen try again and come up with a more liberal policing machine this time. A dead cop brought back to life as RoboCop.
Parents only read about in comic books.
Robo, excuse me, Robo. Any special message for all the kids watching at home?
Stay out of trouble.
Neumeier wrote scenes that mocked the happy talk of TV news, the kind of satirical writing that we saw in films like The Graduate and Catch-22, written by Buck Henry.
I think that people like Buck Henry were a bit luckier because they were working at a time where you could be a little more free about making those kind of comments and being overtly satirical. We've also moved into an era of marketing and sort of the corporate blockbuster era where they're really going for the widest possible audience. They want what they call 4 quadrants. They want everybody to like the picture, and they want them to like it all over the world, almost regardless of culture.
10 years after RoboCop, Neumeier penned this even more satirical postmodern film, which was based on a rabidly right-wing novel about the threat to humans by alien bugs. The battle scenes were as exciting as Star Wars. The bugs were entirely computer-generated. The look was bright and shiny. The soundtrack was explosive.
That scene where Johnny Rico walks into the brain bug cavern and confronts the brain bug is, you know, that's every American, maybe not just American, that's every soldier in the world coming in and saying, yeah, you may be smart, but I got a gun, you know, and now who's smart?
You know what this is? Sure you do. You're some kind of big, fat, smart bug, aren't you?
But the politics of Starship Troopers went deeper than making fun of macho soldiers and came from a surprising source.
Paul said, oh gosh, I've always wanted to make this movie set in Germany in 1935, and it's about a bunch of teenagers, and they're all coming into their life, and it's exciting time, and things are happening in the country, and everybody's joining the Nazi Party, and the thing that he thought that was amusing to him was, he said, and nobody knew it was wrong. And I said to him, oh, they'll never let us do that, you know, in Hollywood. I mean, a real story about, you know, 1935 Nazi, you know, young Nazis who, before they know they're bad. But that's where Starship came in. It's about, oh, I guess it was about 5 years later, I thought, oh, you could do that with this.
Officer on deck.
Carry on. Burial detail. Dismissed.
I think some people consider it camp, and what Paul and I decided to do was we decided not to tell anybody what we were doing. We decided to never, ever let on, oh yeah, these are the bad guys, these are the good guys, whatever. We just played it straight down the middle. We sort of tip our hand in the third act where Neil Patrick Harris comes out in a Nazi uniform, and that was a bit of a controversial decision, because originally you were supposed to understand that through his speech only. He makes a speech about numbers and this and that, and I have to kill people every day. It's a very fascistic idea.
You don't approve? Well, too bad. We're in this for the species, boys and girls. It's simple numbers. They have more. And every day I have to make decisions that send hundreds of people like you to their deaths.
Didn't they tell you, Colonel? That's what the mobile infantry's good for.
Later, I think we both decided that that was, to make sure you got it, that was really the moment. Now, I think the audience doesn't like that moment. I remember being in a preview with in the bathroom afterwards when all these young men were coming in. They'd see the picture, and they were kind of upset because this was a picture they wanted to embrace, but something in that ending had said, no, maybe these aren't your heroes, or maybe there's something. I think it put a little bit of doubt into them about it or something. I don't know.
What's it thinking, Colonel?
This is the ending that Neumeier mentions, filmed in golden hues. The enemy's humiliated, tied up. It has a doleful look.
It's afraid. It's afraid!
Triumphal music begins to play.
Science fiction particularly allows you to do things politically that you wouldn't do, that might not be accepted as easily if you did them straight, because it's not here, it's slightly over here. It's a little bit skewed, and I think humor does the same thing. And if you add them together in the right way, then you can probably get away with murder if you want. But
Neumeier and Verhoeven combined science fiction and politics to create the spiciest entertainment cinema of their times. On the other side of the world from America in the 90s, in Australia and New Zealand, at first it looks like the big trends of the time, digital, postmodernism and satire, were having no impact. This New Zealand director, Jane Campion, emphasises one of the timeless themes in the story of film, that to make great movies, you must get your unconscious juices flowing.
The unconscious mind is a little bit like a quite shy pet, and you have to set conditions where it trusts that if it comes out and plays, you'll feed it, you'll pay attention to it, you won't ignore it, you won't scare it. So, like, when I first started writing, one of the things I realized was that, you know, like for the first, 3 hours when you sit down to do something, you know, nothing really happens. It's like it's testing you. Will you stay for that fourth hour? I always think you have to create a very safe environment, you know, personally for yourself. And also, I think when you collaborate with actors and people like that too, their unconscious selves, you know, which you want to get in the interplay, because that's where the genius is also shy. It's wanting to know it's going to be safe. Wants all the signs, you know, like you can make mistakes, it doesn't matter, you can be a fool, doesn't matter. We're here to play, really, you know.
Campion's great film An Angel at My Table is about this very thing. A shy young woman with a lively unconscious mind, Janet Frame, doesn't feel safe in the world. Frame's training to be a teacher. The whole class is looking, and so is the training assessor. In this moment, frame freezes, has a panic attack. Campion and actress Kerry Fox focused the scene on a piece of chalk. Campion has it filmed in close-up.
I don't know why, that will work, that's what I thought, that will work. You know, I was looking for something, you know, I have to admit that when I was doing that I was going, well, what's going to make a turn, you know, how can we visually kind of do something with it? And then just the idea that I guess her world kind of crunched into that piece of chalk. I like to be able to say, look, I'm really, if I need to, I'm confused about what to do next. You know, I'm not really sure we've got the scene, or I'm not feeling the drama. It's all about feeling for me again, you know. If I'm feeling it through my body, I can feel it, it's happening. And if it's not, you have to say something, because you can't pretend, you know. You've got to kind of explore it. I think one of the things I believe is that you have to be strong about vulnerability, you know, like stand up for it. And stand up for gentleness and softness, because I think they're really powerful qualities. And because I think, you know, the so-called bluff leadership qualities of, you know, megaphone type voice on set isn't really helpful when it comes for, you know, actors feeling anxious and nervous and trying to make themselves vulnerable, because they're trying to find their channel too. You know, trust their instrument and, you know, say, everybody, okay, 1, 2, 3, off you go. You know, it doesn't respond. So I always try to create a really relaxing and forgiving atmosphere.
Campion's film The Piano used very subjective images and sounds to suggest the inner world of a girl who's growing up. Here the child's looking through her fingers. They look like red curtains about to open onto life.
The voice you hear is not my speaking voice, but my mind's voice. I have not spoken since I was 6 years old. No one knows why. Not even me.
The Piano is the only film directed by a woman to win the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival. The majority of, and the highest paid, screenwriters in early Hollywood were women, but then filmmaking became more male.
Will be my last.
Women make up about 50% of the whole world. And but there's only about 3% of women who are directors who are actually probably selecting content. And, you know, it just seems to me really sad that, because women's, I think, interests are a lot different than male interests in large, you know. I think they're a lot more nurturing. They're much more orientated to connection, and male interests are much more interested in sort of building, identifying their, you know, sort of blustering egos or whatever. Bombing things, blowing things up, being strong man, Spider-Man, whatever, you know. Which I don't think women do, and I think, you know, what's important is to try and not change the guise. I mean, I think it's fun what they do, but to sort of get the balance, you know, have what women do. But because most of the men run the business, I think they understand or identify much better with male interests. But the audience is actually probably more identifiably female. But sometimes one of the great betrayals of the female is that they want to see themselves through male eyes. So they're very interested in what men do too.
If Jane Campion was the Ingmar Bergman of Australasian cinema, making films about intense human psychology, this man, Baz Luhrmann, was its flamboyant Vincent Minnelli. Campion's films could have been made in the 1920s, but Luhrmann's bring us carousing back into the postmodern 90s. Baz Luhrmann defined the first days of digital, like the man himself, His films are a meteor shower of references to everything from Shakespeare to Bollywood.
Shakespeare and Bollywood cinema had something in common, and what they had in common was the blindness to taste or style or any of those imposed ideals about art. What they were singularly focused on was the engagement of as many human beings as possible from as many types of humanity to be moved and touched by story to deliver a big idea through an emotional experience.
Luhrmann used these all-encompassing ideas about emotion and art, what he called participatory cinema, to make one of the key films of the 90s, his hyperactive version of Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. Captions, fireworks, splintered edits, flash-forwards, choirs.
Shakespeare starts Romeo and Juliet with very broad high comedy. You know, stand-up routine, really. You know, almost addressed to camera. You know, but it had to be broad, it had to be fun, it had to be stand-up. Right, to engage the audience, to disarm all of them before he suddenly goes, enter the romantic lead, Romeo.
Leonardo DiCaprio, backlit at sunrise, long lens.
In the text, the boys meet in the town square. We're now transporting Romeo and Juliet to a contemporary world that is Miami-like, where religion and politics are mixed up with each other. There is no town square in an American contemporary city. But there is a gas station, because everybody, they don't ride horses, they drive in trucks and cars. Where do those cars meet? At the gas station. Where is the town square? The gas station. What if we ironically quote the world of cinema? What if it is like a Sergio Leone, you know, piece of cinema? What if it's like a Western, right? That would be a good way of doing that. Sergio Leone Shootout meets the town square gas station in high comedy style. Whether you think we've done it well or not, if you look at that sequence, I think you can see that that set of choices has at least led to that result. Whether you agree with it or not, that's how we got there.
I will bite my thumb at them, which is a disgrace to them if they bear it.
Shakespeare's exact comic dialogue, but his swords are guns here.
Go forth, I will back thee!
And knights have become street kids in Hawaiian shirts.
I do bite my thumb, sir! Do you bite your thumb at us?
Sir.
Is the law of our side if I say aye? No! No, sir, did I bite my thumb at you, sir, but I bite my thumb, sir! Do you quarrel, sir? Quarrel, sir? No, sir! But if you do, sir, and for you I serve as good a man as you! No, Bernard!
The Sergio Leone gunfight shot in close-up. A track in.
Poor fools, you know not what you do!
A Leone widescreen composition and the panpipe music from his films. One of Luhrmann's biggest challenges in the film was how to stage, in an innovative way, the famous scene where Romeo and Juliet meet for the first time.
The audience know this is going to happen. How can it happen in a way in which their delicious expectation and enjoyment of it's going to happen can be suspended so that when it happens, it's a surprise that they knew was going to happen? It was so perplexing. We were in Miami. And this is, I suppose, the spontaneous, artistic, creative bit of it. That night we went out to dinner, and there was a nightclub. What happened was I went to the bathroom, and I was thinking about the problem. I go into the bathroom, I'm thinking about the problem, and as I am down washing my hands, I look up, and I can see a girl's hair. And I look and I think, this is the most brilliant thing. It's the antechamber of the girl's bathroom. And after you come out of the bathroom, like I was, you wash your hand, you comb your hair, and there's a fish tank dividing the boy and the girl's antechamber. And it was as simple as going, that's it. That's the moment, and that's where it came from.
madam, your mother calls.
So it was a combination of extremely academic work, followed by methodology, just work, labor, process, and I think maybe being open to the world around us and luck. So that's how it happened. That was that one.
Luhrmann's Moulin Rouge took his ideas about innovative cinema even further. At the start of the film, the camera sweeps through model and computer-generated shots of the grey, dank alleyways of Paris, and then swoops up to the garret of a poet.
And then one day, a magic day he passed.
His face tear-stained because he has loved and lost a beautiful courtesan. Then we flash back to the famous nightclub, the Moulin Rouge, where the love story took place. It's a frenzied, red Luhrmann world of wild postmodern song and love from space. At one point, the girls sing Voulez-vous coucher avec moi from La Belle's Lady Marmalade, whilst the men crash into the chorus of Nirvana's Smells Like Teen Spirit.
Some dogs are fire, love to play with fire.
No one in the world was mashing up Sergio Leone, MTV, Hispanic telenovelas, fashion, cross-dressing, and the kaleidoscopic cinema of 90s Hong Kong with such aplomb. Reality had lost its realness in Basland, the very definition of the first days of digital. Luhrmann called Strictly Ballroom, Romeo and Juliet, and Moulin Rouge the Red Curtain trilogy. To make them, he set himself rules, a kind of manifesto, that were almost the opposite of Lars von Trier's Dogma rules, the other great 90s movie manifesto.
You as an audience...
The first of Luhrmann's rules was that we need to know the story up front.
You get the thing. I mean, Moulin Rouge opens, I think, with the opening line. It's something like, "The woman I loved is dead. She was the star of the Moulin Rouge." Romeo and Juliet opens with something like, "Doth with their death bury their parents' strife." You are told right up front that the lovers, or a lover, is going to die. And by the way, a recent epic sort of participatory cinematic work in the beginning called Titanic, it's pretty clear in the beginning, one of them's going to end up below the waters. So that's one rule. You know where it's going to conclude. Two, in this Red Curtain trilogy, to keep the audience alive, and by the way, it's kind of after the fact, I say you've got to have a device, right, a distancing device, but really, why would you do a musical without music? But essentially, there's got to be something that keeps the whole cinematic experience heightened, so you don't fall into ever a feeling that it's somehow keyhole, that it's psychological. You know, in the case of Strictly Ballroom, you know, even dramatic scenes are danced out, you know, "Les, come here," you know, it's dance, and Romeo and Juliet, it's the language, you know, "You bite your thumb at me, sir," and then Moulin Rouge, of course, it's song, it's music.
I was made for loving you, baby. You were made for loving me.
The only way of loving me, baby, is to pay a lovely fee.
Just one night, just one night.
There's no way, 'cause you can't pay.
In the name of love, one night, in the name of love.
Visually, this is pure romantic cinema. Moonlight, a rooftop tryst, reverse angle editing, 2 shots. But the music is a wild 90s mashup of pop songs, used almost like dialogue. as if reality had been remixed by a DJ.
Don't leave me this way.
You think that people would have had enough of silly love songs?
I look around me and I see it isn't so.
In this participatory cinema, in particular take a musical, you need to know where it's heading, and you need the story to be extremely linear. One thing happens precisely after another, like maths, so that you save time, so that you can take the human moment, oh, I love you, I love you, I love you, which in a psychological scene might be, you know, I really love you. And music and the expression of that could take an extra 3 minutes. And we could expand the emotional experience of that beyond the reality in life. And that's where the romanticism comes in, is that we're making something that happens in life better than it is in life, bigger than it is in life.
Better and bigger than life. Exactly what many movie makers aimed for in the last days of digital. At the end of the old millennium, the story of film was full of the fizz and feedback of those days, and the rapture of self-loss. But then came the 21st century.